I would now like to ask our panelists to come to the podium and the moderator for the next panel. And as they assemble, let me introduce the moderator, John Fensterwald. John writes the education policy blog Educated Guess and edits the Top Ed website for Silicon Valley Education Foundation. Before that, John was an editorial writer for the San Jose Mercury News with a focus on education. He is a Baltimore native and a graduate of Tufts University. And as our team assembles up here, we'll just take a couple minutes. But please do not leave the room. We're going to continue in just a couple minutes while everybody gets mic'd. Thanks.
So let me introduce the panel and we'll proceed. To my right, Linda Darling-Hammond is Professor of Education at Stanford University. Appropriate, I haven't even given her accomplishments yet, where she has been provided a guiding role in programs that have distinguished the Grad School of Education, Stanford Center for Opportunity, Policy, and Education, or SCOPE, the School Redesign Network, and the Stanford Teacher Education Program, or STEP. She headed President Obama's Education Policy Transition Team in 2008-09 and continues to serve as a policy advisor to the President. And I highly recommend her latest book, The Flat World and Education, How America's Commitment to Equity Will Determine Our Future. And I took a look at it just this morning. Mike Hanson, to my far left, has been Fresno Unified District Superintendent since 2005. He is responsible for leading the California's fourth largest school district and overseeing the academic performance of 73,000 students. He served as the lead superintendent for California's Race to the Top application and has provided insights and guidance on Common Core Standards work. He's recognized as one of the state's most innovative and accomplished leaders. Before going to Fresno, he served as associate superintendent in nearby Elk Grove. And just as a personal, I ran into Mike in the elevator this morning, and he had that worried look that all superintendents will have in the next 6 months of having to face a $30 million budget cut in Fresno.
We're not applauding the budget cut.
Not the budget cut.
Not the budget cut.
We're not saying 50, are we? Or, no. All right. To my far right is Ted Mitchell, who is president of the State Board of Education, as well as the president and CEO of New Schools Venture Fund, a venture philanthropy firm committed to transforming public education, particularly for underserved students. In the past decade, New Schools has raised $150 million and supported more than 40 education entrepreneurs. Before heading up New Schools, Ted was president of Occidental College. He also chaired Governor Schwarzenegger's advisory committee on education excellence. And I'm not sure if you've ever seen Ted in action on the school board, but I've admired his extraordinary skills in diplomacy and tact and patience.
Thank you, John.
And finally, David Sanchez, to my immediate left, is president of the 30,000-member California Teachers Association. He's an engaging man in a tough job in difficult times, representing the interests of dues-paying members. Since 1980, he has been a kindergarten teacher for the Santa Maria Bonita School District and has worked as a community college instructor. His CTA leadership includes 4 years as secretary-treasurer and 4 years as vice president of CTA. He holds a BS in early childhood education from Cal Poly and a master's in education as well. So, panel, thank you. So before moving on to some of the questions that we had talked about discussing today, I did want to give David and other panelists, if they choose to, a chance to reflect on the mayor's thoughts. David, why don't you comment if you like?
I'd be happy to. First of all, CTA is actually 230,000 members throughout the state of California, representing K-12 to higher ed. And so, you know, there's quite a few of us out there that work in our public schools every single day. And to tell you that a classroom teacher knows what's happening to our classrooms today, the problems and the challenges that we face every single day, just talk to a classroom teacher. Now, I have to tell you, since the mayor was giving his remarks this morning, I had turned my cell phone off, but it's been ringing off the hook since he made his comments. And I have to remind, and the mayor and I have known each other for a very long time. You know, he did work for CTA at one time. He was also an employee of United Teachers Los Angeles. And no one knows best about what's really going on in our schools and has had the experience of seeing what's happening than our mayor. But I have to take umbrage with some of the comments that he made. I would not be fulfilling my role as the president, speaking on behalf of California's teachers, on behalf of California's educational support professionals, if I didn't say that absolutely everything, that I agreed with absolutely everything he said. First of all, yes, we have challenges in our schools today. We do, no doubt. But the classroom teacher is not the person who has created those problems. The classroom teacher is not the one who has created this deficit and is living with doing more with less. And in fact, we've been doing more with less for the last 2 or 3 years. We have lost 30,000 teachers in the state of California because of this huge budget deficit in the last couple of years. Our class sizes have increased phenomenally, where we have kindergarten classes of 40 to 1, when we used to have 20 to 1. We have classrooms in some of our large urban areas where children have to bring their own chairs in order to have a place to sit in our classrooms. And so in spite of all these challenges, we're doing the best possible job that we can, knowing that we have these obstacles before us. But to have this finger-pointing blame game and then targeting it to the classroom teacher is not right. It's not the way to go. What we're here today is to discuss how we can collaboratively be a part of the process to solving the challenges that we face every single day in our classrooms. And it starts by being a part of the process. Classroom teachers should be involved in discussions that affect them in the classroom. And that's what I'm saying. So the mayor may have some very interesting, challenging, progressive ideas, but it's not going to happen without classroom teachers being a part of that process. And it's unfortunate that he's had some challenges working with our largest affiliate. But at the same time, he knows that if he needs and wants to get the job done in Los Angeles, he's got to include them as part of the process. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And we are more than willing, all 325,000 of us are more than willing to sit down and talk with anybody, to anybody, about what's happening in our classrooms and how we can all best meet the needs of this ever-increasing challenge of providing the best possible public education for all of our children. I'm a product of the public school system. My parents, too, were undocumented cotton pickers from Texas, and whoever thought that one day my grandparents would ever see that their grandson would become the president of the California Teachers Association, thanks to public education. So we all have a big job ahead of us, and that's to work collaboratively to find the solutions so that we can provide the best possible schools for all of our children and not a select few. Thank you.
Good, thanks. I think we're going to touch on a number of the areas that the mayor raised in our discussion, but Mike, I did want to give you an opportunity if you wanted to talk about, these are difficult times in relations, a district's relations with its teachers' unions, and perhaps mention the approach you've taken in Fresno.
So I thank you. I would start just in now I understand why the mayor went first, in case anybody was guessing. I would predict as we go on that David and I will probably intersect at some point in the conversation in a productive way. With the frame of the challenge that the mayor laid out, I would completely agree with. And if I were pushed on the outset of the conversation to choose in kind of a binary place that I had to land, I would land with largely the mayor's arguments. However, I think what we've got to keep focused on is the challenge, oppositional, tooth and nail kind of conversation and strife-ridden language is absolutely not a long-term strategy. It may be necessary for breakthrough, but when you look at any organization, and in particular any school district, particularly large ones, that have any type of sustained long-term growth, it is not rooted in or based upon anything other than some type of respectful and productive, working, honest relationship with labor. So we've got to get to that place on a grand scale here, and I don't think we're there as a state yet with any level of productivity, and we have to do that. I think his points around finance being unstable is something you will hear us talk about. It is absolutely killing us in school districts and in the classroom and in schools. The poor teacher evaluation system is, I would agree with as well. It's largely, however, of our own doing in local school districts, and we need to take responsibility for that. This is difficult for superintendent to admit and to say, but we've got to recognize as a local superintendent, two people got to sign a contract, right? So whatever we've got for contract language around teacher evaluation, we've signed off on at some point in the past. So we have to work our way out of that instead of just recognizing and wanting to blow the system up. And we've got to I think, be thoughtful about that as we move through the process. And finally, I would just say that what really needs to have a great deal of transparency is the process by which we try to move from confrontation between labor and management, which is inevitable at the beginning part of this process, whether it's CTA and governor, or it's mayor and UTLA, or whether it's superintendent and local union, or whether it's principal and site rep. We have to have great transparency around how we move from confrontation into a more collaborative space. Because ultimately that's what we have to do. And if we're not recognizing that that's the developmental path we're trying to go down, we're absolutely missing the boat. And how we move to a more collaborative relationship is what we need to learn how to do. It's the adult conversation we talk about. It is absolutely not sexy. It's absolutely difficult to do. It absolutely takes great dedication to get to, but it, in the end, is the only way to go. And I will disagree with the mayor in that I don't believe that the city leader is the only way to go. I entered Fresno at a time where my mayor, Mayor Autry, was trying to do exactly the same thing that Mayor Villaraigosa was trying to do in LA. Not a lot of fun. Hey, Jonathan Raymond, Sac City, how you doing there? Thought I'd call you out. So, my friend John, it is. We need to be focused on running schools, and I do think that long term, that we've got to be. There is a way for superintendents and boards in the local governance structure that is set up in California for it to work, and I think there are ways we can talk about that throughout the morning.
Good, thanks. Just on the particular point of collaborative approach, and we'll come back to again some of the issues that the mayor raised. Ted, you worked and chaired the committee on evaluations in LA. Talk about the process of working with the unions that you encountered.
Sure. And what's interesting, I'm looking at Antonio, and so do we get to invite you back up to sort of do the kind of. And I want to get back to John. I'm kind of thinking about the mayor's talk as kind of a bubble chart in terms of what were the big messages, what were the small messages, and then how are we resizing those bubbles? Because I think one of the issues is how we hear each other, and I want to talk some about that in just a moment. But the superintendent of the school board established this commission to take a look at teacher effectiveness. And it was a broad-ranging charge. We were to look at the evaluation system. We were to look at tenure as a specific point of contact. We were to look at differentiated compensation, and we were to look at legislative impediments to doing things differently. It was also broad-ranging in terms of the membership. There were about 35 people on the committee, and they ranged from the president of UTLA and several UTLA representatives, representatives of the administrators union, head of the administrators union in Los Angeles, parents, community leaders, and folks working in classrooms, because I agree that there's no legitimacy to a process that doesn't inquire at the place where instruction happens. And so we were very conscious of that. And from the beginning, the union leadership was responsive, respectful, but also quite clear that they felt that the debate nationally was beginning to look a lot like a runaway train, and that the runaway train was headed into some tough mountain passes that just weren't right. And Linda and I were talking about this beforehand. You know, part of that, the runaway that they feared, was a runaway toward a rather mindless approach to merit pay that would simply associate a teacher's income with a score by students in their classroom on an annual basis. So we had to kind of go through a lot of this to clear away some underbrush to finally decide what it is we were talking about. And once we got there, we actually had very productive conversations, really across the board. And I think that it was very helpful for the union leadership to hear from parents and community members that they really needed to feel the sense that teachers were being evaluated based in part on the progress that their students were making. As imperfect as our measures of that progress are, it was very good to hear that, because it then moved our conversation into a conversation about how we might responsibly do that rather than whether to do that. And I think that that's the progress that the mayor talked about. In the end, we did develop a set of recommendations to the board that really answered some of the questions that the mayor asked this morning, where we did recommend a longer look toward tenure. We did recommend that tenure be a higher bar that could establish some real credibility internal to the process. And we did recommend the inclusion of student achievement in the evaluation of teachers, along with evaluation of classroom practice. Now, in the end, UTLA objected to the last part, to the part about student achievement. And so we left an incomplete consensus on the table. But I felt that they were honest participants in the debate, and that we had moved much closer to the how question than the whether question in Los Angeles, and agree wholeheartedly with the mayor. What I heard you say is that we need to invite and we need to bring organized labor to the table to be able to complete that process and get some answers to those questions.
Thank you. Linda?
I would just like to add 2 points to this very thoughtful conversation. One is that while we're talking a lot about getting rid of bad teachers, at the pre-tenure and thereafter the teacher evaluation thing, and I think the metaphor the mayor used was something about chopping down lemon trees, which is kind of hit me in a visceral way, picturing teachers as lemon trees or something. But the big thing we're not talking about is what every high-achieving country in the world has focused on, and we have not, which is preparing a stable, expert teaching force and ensuring that there's a ready supply of good teachers who've passed all of the hurdles they need to before they get in the profession and are supported to be good. Because we could evaluate a 10th of the teachers out of the profession or 20% or whatever, but if we don't have a supply of good people coming in routinely, that's not going to do us any good in terms of student achievement. And I was thinking about, with the lemon tree analogy, we have Mas Masamoto here with us, who has a wonderful peach orchard, which I and others have picked peaches in from time to time. What he's doing is thinking about how do you plant and nurture good peach trees, not how do I cut down 10% every year and then maybe I'll have a good orchard when I've gotten rid of enough bad ones. That's not how it really works. So you look at Finland, you look at Singapore, you look at Korea, you look at the places that were once low achieving and inequitable, a lot like California today, that are now high achieving and equitable. And a lot of that was building a high quality, stable teaching and school leadership workforce. And if you ask them today about their teacher evaluation systems, they say, well, we have one, but it's not the main thing we focus on. Now, should we focus on teacher evaluation? Yes, and it's something I've looked at for 20 years. When I was at the Rand Corporation, I studied the very first peer assistance and review program in Toledo, Ohio, which was brought into place by a very progressive union leader. And now is continued by another union leader who has made sure that each school board will continue the very first process that made sure that tenure was a serious decision, got rid of poor teachers before tenure, put additional resources in the form of mentor master teachers to assist and evaluate other teachers, puts teachers in intervention or probation if they are doing poorly, and gets rid of those who do not improve within a short period of time without union grievances. It has been hard to get that model adopted across the country, although there are other districts now that do that, and California tried to do something around this statewide, but it has not been, it has taken root in some districts and not others. But it's been hard to get it to spread, in part sometimes because unions looked at it skeptically, but also because school boards have been a problem as well. So there's plenty of blame to go around when you look at, and sometimes principals unions, who didn't want teachers involved in the evaluation of teachers, right, or school boards who thought that was not an appropriate role for teachers to be engaged in mentoring or evaluating other teachers. So if we really want to solve the problems, we're not going to solve them just by pointing at one party in the education system, because there are certainly cases where local union leadership has not been as progressive as we want it to be, but there are also cases where the system as it was constructed in a factory model world of a century ago has got everybody dug in around some images of schooling and teaching that are antiquated and need to be rethought. And a lot of parties are going to have to evolve to get to a place where tenure is a serious decision, and where ongoing evaluation and support is intensive and meaningful, where there are career ladders. It all has to rest on a foundation, however, which we do not have in California right now, of extraordinarily strong entry and preparation for teachers and school leaders, for everyone. That's what has made the difference in the places that have seen huge gains in achievement.
Good, thank you. I think that's probably no doubt a point all of us can agree. I mean, we're sitting amid a financial crisis with schools, but let's back up, and like the legislature, we'll get around to it in this discussion in our time. So first, let's back up and talk about what are the 2 or 3 important steps, and you've mentioned one directly, that you would recommend to improve academic achievement, and if you can do so without a lot of extra dollars, so much the better, and at least for now. And Mike, why don't you start?
So I just feel the need to clarify a couple of points without sounding as though I'm agreeing with everything the mayor said. But I do, because I think I hear, to Ted's point about how we hear each other, David went right to the place of right. You've got to involve teachers. I heard the mayor as a superintendent talking about, in his specific remarks, a specific teacher union leadership, right. which was very different right. than the way David responded with rank and file teachers. So that is a very different conversation point for me. And as the professor was just talking about the need for the entire system, totally agree with that as well. But fixing a pipeline into the system is not going to remediate and deal with poor teachers we've got in the system right now, which I think is another point that the mayor was trying to make, that we need to grapple with that. And that leads me to my response to your question. A couple of ways to improve student achievement goes to, I think, a couple of things that we've been spending time in Fresno on. And number one is it has to begin with the Board of Education. A Board of Education, as they're a lay board, but they represent the community. They have to, in their role as policy makers, have to make a statement about what this school district is about. And in Fresno, I'm very proud of the Board of Education for what they've articulated in their theory of action for the district, what they've articulated in an accountability policy that was coupled very tightly and developed at the same time with the professional learning policy. If we're going to expect this from all of our employees, we're going to support you in this complementary way. And then they also created a data dashboard policy to say, here are some of the measures we're going to put in place. So here's what we want from our system, the theory of action. Here's what we want from employees to carry it out. Here's how we're going to support employees, and here's how we're going to measure it. So that all together, those 4 policies are largely targeted at instruction. So that makes my job a lot easier as the leader of the paid professional staff. So that can help improve student achievement if everybody knows there's an expectation from boardroom to classroom that it's about student achievement, right? When it's about all things other, I think it's very difficult. And it doesn't take a lot of money to do that. It's about policy implementation. The second thing is everybody spends money, even in tight times, on skill development and improvement. Rather than talk about the evaluation part of supervision and evaluation, we have 5 leadership standards in our district. And the first one, purposefully, is a skillful supervision and evaluation of staff. We place a high emphasis on the supervision of staff. And we're in year 3 of helping all of our site leaders and our instructional leaders to improve their skill in classrooms. And we were doing this long before Race to the Top, and we were doing this long before teacher effectiveness became kind of the buzzword, and long before people were talking about value add. And it's largely why we don't have, why we have much more productive conversations about the interaction around whether a teacher is effective or not, is because we spent time on the front end, in my mind, talking about a very critical component of a teacher effectiveness conversation is the supervisor, the person helping to make the determination, skilled or not, right? I think there's a lot of places up and down the state where teachers have a legitimate claim. I know in a classroom, as a classroom teacher, had a legitimate claim. The person supervising me didn't know much. And, you know, a pat on the back saying, good job, was just a little too broad for me. It didn't help me improve my practice. And that is not what a professional teacher is looking for to improve their craft. So I think those are 2 ways, without a lot of money, that you could help sharpen focus and improve academic achievement for kids.
David?
Well, that's a good point, Mr. Superintendent. Thank you for bringing that up, because it's not the teachers' unions who grant permanency or due process to our teachers, but in fact, it's the huge workload that our administrators have to perform in order to do that. And case in point, when I was in kindergarten, my administrator was a bit overtaxed with, on top of the other responsibilities that he had, that he came into my room and said one day, is it okay we use last year's evaluation for this year's evaluation because I'm a bit busy? Are you fine with that? Now, I should have said no, I wasn't. But I said, okay, Phil, whatever. Let's just go on, and I'll keep on doing what I'm doing. And it's very sad that within the last 3 years that 60% of the adopted budget cuts have been affected and been directed toward public schools, PK to higher ed. Very sad that the priority and the way to balance the budget was on the backs of the students of the state of California. That, to me, does not show a commitment to public education and to the future of the state and this country. And it's unfortunate that, you know, we have Sacramento out here that has to make those decisions, but think of the challenges that local school boards have had to make, local decision making on how hard it is to run a program, not knowing if you're going to have to make, like we're going to have to this year, mid-level budget cuts, which could very possibly translate, and for me, as the president of CTA, we could possibly see more teacher job losses happening mid-year. You could very possibly see increased class sizes mid-year. That is not a way to run a public school system in the state of California. And we have to have those honest conversations, and that's what we're looking forward to with this new leadership and this new administration coming in, to have those hard, serious discussions on how do you provide the revenue, the income, the resources into the state so that we can provide the best possible education for all of our children, all of our children. And then we have to look at education reform that is working. For instance, about 500 schools in the state of California are recipients of what we call the Quality Education Investment Act, QEIA. Thanks in part to our Assemblymember Tom Torlakson, our incoming State Superintendent of Public Instruction. He authored this legislation that allows school districts, which many are in LA Unified, to do what they want to do locally to provide what they believe is the best development program for their school site, in collaboration with parents, in collaboration with administration, and teacher-driven led reform. The last week we had a conference here to look at the research that has been done on QIA the last 4 years, and it's phenomenal student achievement has taken place at these 500 schools. Their API scores are phenomenal. Their AYP scores are phenomenal. The number of ethnic minority children that have scored really well and top in math and science and language arts, it's phenomenal. This is the type of proven reform that California should be looking at as a model for our schools to consider.
Good. Ted, putting aside the dollars for a moment, 2 or 3 ways to improve academics.
So setting aside the dollars for a moment, I think that there are a couple of things that we ought to think about long term that we can do now precisely because of the budget situation that we're in. The mayor alluded to them, and they're in the PPIC material. A couple of them are in the PPIC materials as well. So how do you decide when the budget goes bad where to put scarce dollars? We operate in that environment blindfolded because we continue to be the laughingstock of the nation in relation to our data system. We don't know what we need to know to be able to make tough decisions. And the pennies on the total budget investment that it would require to create the kind of longitudinal data system that we need is a simple must, both for the short term and for the long term. So that's number one. I think that can also, I want to dive down a little bit, I think that that's also absolutely essential, and I'll come back to it probably later in the conversation, to leverage California's commitment to adopt the Common Core, because it creates a brand new environment for us for a range of things from teacher preparation, continuing professional development for teachers, student assessment, and the integration of new assessments that are more adapted to 21st century learning skills. I think it's a huge opportunity, but at the core, if we don't have a data system that can deliver information to the classroom teacher, to the parent, to the superintendent, and to the principal, we're operating blindfolded. 2 is that we have already, in a series of budget bills, made dollars more flexible to districts. So once you know where you want to put the dollars, you have to be able to make the decisions to do that. And so we need to pay some attention as the legislature reconvenes to making sure that that's not just an emergency provision, but that that's the way we do business. Because the people who know best how to spend resources are the people who spend their time with kids. And we need to put more responsibility in their hands to make those decisions and use the data systems to evaluate them. And then there was almost some applause. That was great. I want to encourage you to not hold back. Doesn't happen often at the State Board, so I'm looking for a little love here this morning. And then finally, I think that it is imperative, as the mayor said, for us to put in place a finance system that creates an adequate floor. Those are 2 words, adequate and floor. That does not mean inadequate and ceiling, right?
Yes. Thank you.
An adequate floor, and that then as the state's budget builds, that doesn't simply raise that floor for everybody, but does provide differential resources to schools based on the needs of their students that are, as we know, driven by socioeconomic condition, also English language learner status, special needs, a couple of categories that I think we could all pretty quickly agree on. I raise those because I think that those are plumbing issues that we need to get done now before we can even engage in some of the more micro things.
So Linda, in your book you talk about developing habits of mind. So how do we get to the point where we can measure that? We have the California Standards Test, we have California High School Exit Exam, we have the Early Assessment Program, and now we're going to have Common Core. And so I know it's your hope that the state consortiums will develop new kinds of assessments. And that, in turn, might change learning. Could you talk about that for a moment, if you will?
Sure. And I guess I'd like to start just by saying every single thing that's been said, I think, is really helpful. I agree with each of those components. And if people could think in their minds about stitching those together, you'd begin to be close to some of where we need to be. And I want to add, just because Mike gave such a good description of the supervisory, the importance of good supervision processes, that that can be a huge lever. It needs to be built on a foundation of good processes for recruiting and training principals who understand instruction, who are well prepared to take on that kind of task, and then who get all of the kind of help that Mike is talking about. And so before I talk about the kind of learning we want kids to do, and I will say a word about that, I do want to be sure we're also focusing on the kind of learning we need adults to do, the kind of learning we need principals and teachers to do in order to produce the kind of learning we want kids to do. Because we usually take these topics separately as though they're separable. They really aren't. We have to build all of those components. California has developed and invented some of the most useful ideas and activities and organizations in education of any state in the country. And most of the ones we've created, we've then terminated. So the California School Leadership Academy, for example, which was a model for 20 other states, was zeroed out of the budget. But it provided one of the pathways to help principals do the kinds of things that Mike was talking about. So I think we need to continue to keep our eye on that ball as well. And we need to be preparing teachers and principals who understand instruction deeply and who understand challenging kinds of learning and critical thinking. And so I'm going to keep beating that drum because I think it's the foundation on which everything else happens. Now, we do need to move the ball on what we're asking kids to do and how we assess that. And I think Ted's point about the Common Core standards providing an opportunity for us to think about curriculum and assessment for 21st century learning is critical. And it is where we need to put a lot of attention in the next couple of years because we've adopted the Common Core. Now we've got to figure out how to make it real. The standards will not teach themselves. They need a set of curriculum frameworks. They need a set of thoughtful assessments. Then there needs to be all of the teacher and leader development around that. If you were right now in one of the high-achieving nations in the world, California, of course, is the 6th largest economy. Most of these nations are, roughly the same size as this state. What kids would be doing in classrooms and on tests would be very different than what we see in most places here. In Singapore, on the science examinations, they will be designing their own science experiments, conducting those experiments, collecting data, writing up that evidence, usually in a 20 or 30-page report that looks like what you would see in a scientific journal. That would be scored as part of the examination system for their examination in science. That would be true in Australia and the United Kingdom as well, and in many other places. In English, in the A-level examinations that are used around the world, in the UK, many other countries, kids would have a set of 8 or 10 papers they have to write during the course of the school year in various genres. They'd have to write informational texts and they'd have to respond to literature and so on. Those would be written to certain specifications, collected, scored in a reliable manner by trained scorers, teachers and in those schools and teachers in other places and so on. And that's part of the examination system. So at the end of the day, what colleges want, what employers want, which is kids who can think, who can write, who can frame problems, who can persevere, who can organize their efforts, more than bubbling in on a multiple choice test. That's what's encouraged and developed in the examination systems in high-achieving countries. So I think one of the things we need to be looking at is how do we begin to move towards the kinds of skills that people really need in the 21st century. On the National Assessment of Educational Progress right now, kids go into one of the tasks, they have to do research using the internet about a particular scientific phenomenon. They have to collect evidence, weigh and balance that evidence, answer a question, write a report. That's on our National Assessment of Educational Progress, you know, the one that California does so poorly on. There's nothing like that in the assessment system in California, like what kids will encounter on the national test. So we really, one of the things we need to be doing is revamping the California standards tests. We have a good structure in many respects. The end of course examinations are a structure that could allow for the infusion of other kinds of tasks and activities that kids would engage in. When you build the capacity for teachers to score these in reliable ways, as other countries have done, you also get teachers a lot smarter about how to teach rigorous content in appropriate ways. So that is part of what we need to do if we're going to raise achievement in ways that translate into college success, into career success, and into competition or competitiveness in the international context today.
So California isn't an island, and much of what we do is driven by the feds, and in particular No Child Left Behind. And so that law, which is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, is coming up for renewal. And we know that with the Republicans taking over the House, there'll be less federal aid likely, and some of the programs that, and certainly the stimulus aid we've gotten in the past year, we won't see again anytime soon. So I guess I was wondering, if you, looking ahead to the reauthorization, what are the one or two things that you would like to see done differently from the federal level through the reauthorization that would help California do what you're talking about in terms of help us in terms of the way we educate our children and change to some of the aspects you were talking about, performance assessments and the like. I mean, you deal with No Child Left Behind all the time, Mike.
So I would keep it brief and say the two things that I would like to see right out of the gates is, and I think it's essential that they move to a growth model. And I think there's wide support for that, and even the department is moving in that direction. Yeah. I think the focus on subgroups is a very positive outgrowth of NCLB that should forever be there, so that we don't leave groupings of kids behind that historically were left behind. But I think that moving to a growth model would be positive, and I also think the Secretary exercising his authority to grant waivers and give the same kind of, move into a flexibility world like our state has with respect to some of the categoricals, would be a no-cost effort for them that would give us some ability maybe to direct dollars in a way that would be more effective at the site and district level.
David, I know
yes,
NEA has had great concerns with it.
Yes, we have. In fact, I've had the privilege and the opportunity to speak directly with Secretary Duncan on several occasions, along with our leadership, to talk about the reauthorization of NCLB. And we've had discussions with the past chair, who will no longer be the chair of the Ed Committee, that overlooks the reauthorization and the new language of what at that time they were calling the blueprint. And all we were asking our legislators in D.C. that dictate to all of us what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, when we're going to do it, and what goals we're supposed to meet, all we were asking them to do was to allow the educators, everybody in the process, to be a part of the process and listen to some of the concerns we have about No Child Left Behind. For instance, they must have been smoking something really good to say that by 2014, every single child in the country will be able to pass one single standardized test. 2014. Okay, in my class, 95% of my children don't speak English. And that's the way it is throughout the entire state. We have a lot of English language learners who are learning the language, and yet you're going to expect them to be the same proficient as a fully English language learner is going to be, perform at the same test level as they. It's going to take a process. By 2014, I don't think it's going to happen. And the other thing is, we believe that education is a right and not a race, like this race to the top stuff that's been coming from D.C. When did you start penalizing, and punishing schools for not making that bar? Like he said, we should recognize and have a growth model. We should recognize growth, but they're not going to actually hit that bar every single year. It's almost impossible to do that when they keep raising the bar. But if there are schools that need help, don't punish them. Help them. Give them the resources that they need so they too can become and have that upward movement that we need to do in order to ensure student achievement in all of our schools.
Ted, and the State Board, you had to administer all these programs, school improvement grants and the like. What changes would you like to see at the federal level?
So I want to take slight issue, and I want to be careful to be hearing David right. What I want to make sure is that when you say that we have to have a process and 2014 is an unreasonable goal, that you're not also saying that at the current rate of progress, 103 years is the right answer.
No. What I'm saying, what I'm saying is recognize, just like our superintendent said, is you have to recognize growth, period.
Got it.
And we're all moving in the right direction, but to put a limit and say that, I mean, come on, all of us?
So I'm cool with that. But I also think, and this is, I'm actually going to answer your question, John. I think that it's really important while we're moving to so growth model, yes. And as we move to the growth model, we've got to develop a sense of urgency that is incompatible with a completely open-ended, unevaluated system. And so we need to figure out ways for us to put markers in that we will agree to. So my second hope is that a couple of the categorical programs, because I totally agree with Mike that we want to help the federal government be as flexible as the state is being with districts, once again on the principle that local decision-making is probably better than some abstract decision-making. But I'd like to see Title I, for example, be negotiated between the Federal Department of Education, someone who runs the California desk in the Department of Education, and the state, in which we say 2014 is unreasonable, at the current growth rate, 103 years is unreasonable, so here's what we're going to bet. And here's what we're going to commit to, so that that becomes an agreement between the state and the federal government in which we set a bar that increases our sense of urgency and accountability about outcomes for kids. And number 3 is Title II, and I promise I won't go down all the titles. Title II, which, as you know, is where most of the federal money that is geared toward teacher preparation is centered. I think if we're going to take Linda's proposition seriously, that we ought to focus on Moss's orchard and growing the next generation of trees, we ought to build in some accountability there too. And so very specifically, I think that we need a Title II program that holds institutions of higher education accountable for producing effective teachers, and the thing we haven't mentioned yet, teachers who actually are able to persist in a pretty challenging system. So that would be my quick hit list.
Linda?
Let me pick up where Ted left off and suggest that, particularly with respect to creating this higher set of expectations for entering teachers, and I would add school leaders. I want to link that back to something Mike said. California actually has once again done something very thoughtful and innovative in requiring that schools of education develop or submit their students to a teacher performance assessment. And right now in the state, there is a state-developed teacher performance assessment, and there's one developed and used by about 30 some institutions, including alternative routes and charter management organization. It, cuts across all kinds of preparers of teachers and says in order to enter, you have to be able to plan a curriculum unit linked to the student standards, adapt it for English learners and special education students. You need to be able to instruct it and videotape yourself, reflect on that, collect evidence of student learning, look at the learning, and have all that brought together in a portfolio that can be scored in a reliable way. That's happening in California, and now 22 other states are trying to work together to create a nationally available version of this because we found that it strongly predicts teacher effectiveness when they get in the profession, and it upgrades the quality of teacher education because you get evidence about whether your candidates can actually do what's necessary for an effective teacher to teach. Now, this is something that California developed and never funded. Why are we not surprised? But which with a
Why'd you look at me when you said that?
I don't think this was on your plate, actually. But it's one of those things where a tiny investment could make a huge difference in the quality of the enterprise in the state. And many other states are, as is often the case, picking up on this. In Connecticut, when they began a process which led them to become the top-ranked state in the nation in the late 1990s, they got a little extra money. Someday we'll get a little extra money. They put it into a system to upgrade the standards for school teachers and school principals in terms of training and evaluation, et cetera. School principals are evaluated on whether they can supervise teachers. They pass a performance assessment as well to say, can you look at instruction, can you understand it, can you figure out how to support teachers, and so on. So I think if we begin to think about how you focus, once we get some money, we'll have to figure out how to spend it. If we don't focus on what's going to leverage instruction in low-cost, high-yield ways, we're going to have the experience again of kind of blowing the opportunity and not focusing it where it's most needed. In terms of the federal government, they can assist in that by calling for these kinds of things in Title II, and that conversation is on the table, creating a growth model. Right now, about, I think, 70-some% of schools in California are in program improvement status, but that's true nationwide. By 2014, over 90% of the schools in the country will have been declared failing under the current metrics. So clearly we need a way to look at growth and improvement in a reasonable and thoughtful way. And underscore the importance that the measures of student learning should be productive measures of meaningful learning.
That truly is not Lake Wobegon with 90% in students.
It's the reverse of Lake Wobegon.
So
everyone is below average.
So let's talk about money, which we've begun to deal with. But before we talk about additional money, Mike has reason to be worried. His $30 million represents his district's share, and last night the legislative analysts talked about at least $4 or $5 billion cut for schools likely, and that's even before you begin to deal with the heart of the $25 billion deficit. So what should the legislature, all cuts aren't alike, and the effects on districts are different. And as the mayor talked about, the effect of layoffs, how disproportionate they are in low-performing schools, minority schools in this district. So what should the state do to make sure that when these cuts are coming, that they don't worsen an already inequitable system? How will you deal with it, Mike, as a superintendent?
So I don't even know how to answer that. I'm going to kind of sidle into an answer that hopefully will even come close, but I'm really still thinking about Linda's response to the last question. And it dovetails with this comment about the money, because I think superintendents in general, and very specifically, are absolutely, by the episodic nature of these budget swings and the fact that we are budget developing continually. We are not doing a budget development process once a year. We are in a constant budget development, refinement, retooling, resetting, rebenching. It is an ongoing process 24/7, the entire year round. It's just exhausting to the point where many of my colleagues have just said, this is it for me, right? And I will be quite honest with the folks. I've done the calculations and I can't leave yet. This is something we need to be very mindful of. There's a whole group of superintendents that has just retired, and they were of the generation where capacity building wasn't a conversation. It just wasn't. The group of folks on the cusp now, between say 56 and 60 or so, capacity building is a conversation, but it hasn't quite yet turned into, in the last 3 to 5 years, it's just beginning now to turn into capacity building, into succession planning. It has not done so effectively. So the point is, as we more exhaust the superintendent leadership chairs without sufficient succession planning behind them, we stand to have an incredible gap in superintendent chairs across the state that should have us all, frankly, quaking. because I'm not sure where the leadership comes from. We're talking about site leadership and improvement. I do think we have a huge gap that right up to the governor's office we should be paying attention to. I don't have the answer for how that gets closed, but I do think we should be looking at it through the lens of an opportunity to say, in these times, we should try to be filling those chairs with superintendents who are not necessarily instructional by background. You don't have to have been a teacher, but you're instructional in nature or instructional in focus. Because I think that drives a system differently.
Yes,
and I also think that type of superintendent in replacement can form and shape a leaner, meaner, different type of district office in support of schools that can have fewer resources in central offices and more at schools in support of classroom teachers, principals doing the work of improving instruction. So I think I'm working at this kind of in a roundabout way, because I think the episodic up and down of the budget cycle, this is not rebounding in the ways that we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years. We are down and we remain down, and to the degree people say it's getting better, it is getting better marginally, and it's taken a lot longer. And so I've been talking with our labor groups and our principals and others to say this quite possibly, and we are planning for the fact that this may be permanent.
Right.
So instead of us trying to cut our budget just a certain amount, hoping that the next round of COLAs will come back and we'll fill the downturn gap with one-time resources and catch it on the upswing, we've got to actually plan this downsizing to actually get to the bottom of the well, so to speak. It's a very difficult proposition. We've done it so far without managing permanent layoffs of permanent employees, but I can't guarantee that long term. And the reality is that I don't have a great answer right now. I mean, the best I can do is sit around the table with my principal's budget committee elected by their peers. I go to them and say, I need the folks that you will vote to put in the room when I got to make a tough call, that whatever they give me, you will live with and support. And I meet with our labor leaders and say, here's where I am and here's what my thinking is. What do you think? And that's the best I can do at this point. And we're all guessing until we see what Governor-elect says in January. But we are bracing for the fact that $30 million ongoing is probably on the light side for us.
Now, David, the CTA opposed a bill which would have prevented the kinds of disproportionate layoffs that in low-performing decile schools in the state that the mayor was talking about. Now, perhaps CTA has a different approach, has legitimate reasons against that bill, but how do you deal with this issue of equity when it comes to layoffs, and which certainly are coming this year?
And no doubt. And we see it coming in the very near future. And what I've been saying for the last couple of years, the last 2 or 3 years, is that, you know, there is no more meat on this bone to carve. There just isn't. And the only thing left in the state is that we're going to have to seriously think about amputation, because there's no more. I don't know how much leaner our superintendents in our districts and those of us in the profession can become with the elimination, you know, of wonderful programs like art and music, eliminating school libraries, eliminating school nurses, eliminating voc ed programs. I remember going to what used to be called home ec. It's not called home ec anymore, but a home ec class, asking the instructor, you know, how do you pay for your supplies that you need in order to teach our children how to cook? And she said, I have a zero budget. All of this money is coming out of my own pocket. I go and beg for these supplies so we can have some kind of a home ec program. I had friends who have been 25, 30 years in the profession as music teachers in elementary school districts who've lost their jobs because they had to eliminate music from part of the curriculum that we used to offer our students. We need, within the next 10 years, 100,000 teachers. But the environment that we're currently operating under, why would you want to go into the profession if there's a very strong possibility that you're going to lose your job? And those of us who are still here and working very hard with our superintendents, I don't know if many folks know this, but many teachers throughout the state, in order to save teaching jobs, took furlough days, agreed to furlough days. Some districts agreed to 10 furlough days where they didn't get paid for 10 days in order to save jobs in their school districts. We're working very hard to become this lean, mean machine that we're being forced to do. But this governor-elect has got a huge, huge task before him to work with the legislature and to work with the educational community to figure out how we provide, and I've said this over and over this morning, how do we provide the best possible education for our students? They deserve it. This state should commit to a good quality public education, and it starts by ensuring that you have good quality teachers in every classroom. We agree to that 100%.
So Ted, your Committee on Education Excellence had some good ideas back, seems like decades
Thank
ago.
you, it does seem like a while.
Only 2008 on incremental additional money, and now it's a very different scene. We're at least 15, 20% behind where we were in terms of funding. So what's your perspective now, looking back? Would that have been a very different charge?
Boy, those were the good old days.
Yeah, they
That's
were,
my first thought. Our recommendation, going back to this conversation about weighted student funding, is that if we started at the 2008 base, and at that point we were anticipating that Test 1 in Prop 98 would kick in, and there would be about $11 billion that would come in, and that would be a great down payment on a weighted student, differentiated student funding base for the state. We're clearly not there, and if you take that and invert it, it's probably really where we are. And your question, John, about how do we protect the kids in the system who need the most protection, we owe a moral responsibility as well. I mean, I think that one of the worst things that the legislature could do would be to try to figure out formulas to make those protections. And I think if you and I'll try to go up a level here, if you think about budget flexibility and the importance of budget flexibility for Michael to be able to do his job and putting that into the budget bills, if you think about these seniority-based layoffs as another kind of impediment to being able to make decisions on the basis of what kids need in local communities. For me, what this says, when you draw it through, is that it says that there are some cases where Mike and I are in the same place, I don't know the answer, and when you don't know the answer, you stop, and you let people who are closer to the action make some decisions. And I think we're in one of those situations where Sacramento ought to do everything that it can to reduce the imperatives or the entitlements on the way resources flow, human resources, capital resources, and base budget dollars. And we ought to be clear with our school leadership that equity is an imperative in the state, that a focus on traditionally underserved students is an imperative in the state. And we ought to rely on the results and the transparency to then guide us to an evaluation of how well they did their job and what we can learn from those experiences as we go forward about what the right structure is for a school district, about what the right interventions are for English language learners, about the right ways to put together a diverse, broad staff to meet the needs of varied kids. I think that the state ought to be in avid learning mode right now, because that's probably the best stance for us to be in.
So John, I would just say that I wanted to say something where David was talking about the cuts to arts and libraries and nurses and all the rest. To be clear, Fresno Unified has made none of those cuts in the last few years. But I do realize that we are in a different situation than many places. In large part, I've been there, I'm into year 6 now, right? Longevity makes a difference. Many places that are making those cuts have had turnover in superintendents, and they're just trying to deal, right? And nobody has kept their eye on the financial bottom line. But also, we're in a different place when people have said, how could you be running the 4th biggest district and not be underwater or not be cutting these programs? The short answer is because we were almost taken over by the state in 2005. So we've been working on this problem that caught us a couple years ago. We were working on it for 3.5 years before there was a problem. We worked on it month over month over month over month before there ever actually emerged in the scale that it did. So we've been insulated probably because we worked on it for 40 months before something came onto the radar. So I think there's a lesson there for folks. But I would want to say to the state a few things about the budget. Be honest. Tell us. And then to our legislature, do your job. Right? Just do your job. Come up with a budget. Tell us what it is, and tell us early, and let us do our work at the local level. The 100 days late, I don't need to say it, do I? That's insane. My local Board of Education, by law, has to have a balanced budget in place by their second meeting in June, and the state of California can be 100 days late. Only to have the thing fall out of balance 22 days later or whatever it was. By $6 billion. I mean, look, why don't we listen to Mac this time? Mac Taylor's his name. Let's listen to him this time, right? I'm willing to put my money down on that for once. Let's try that. I mean, but we need to know as early as we possibly can. Give us a good approximation, and then let us try to do this. This time, I am very hopeful. People ask me continually, why do you get wound up? Why do you take this personally? Because I've got, my 3 kids are in my public school system. I've got an 8th grader, a 6th grader, and a kindergartner. It's very personal for me because my kids are in it. I, like the mayor, go Bruins. I'm a UCLA Bruin, and the 4 boys in my family are all UC grads, and we are not annoyed. We're astounded at what the UC system has become in the last 20 years, right? It's falling down around our feet, and nobody seems to be outraged. The entire system. We just have to make hard calls now, with the understanding that it's going to take us 6 to 8 to 10 years to work it through. But there's no easy fix.
We have to be willing to say in Sacramento, and I'll say it since I'm an academic, California has to raise taxes. And it's...
Okay,
let me say 2 things about that. One big elephant that gets into every room is what are we going to do about Prop 13 and all of these very, very tough, deep problems. But the legislature had actually passed a vehicle license tax, managed to get it signed into law, and Governor Schwarzenegger undid it in his first days in office. That $5 billion a year that would have been produced by that tax would have helped us a lot over these last number of years and prevented a lot of the pain that Fresno and other districts undertook. There are a variety of ways to think about raising revenues, but this state is not going to get there by saying over and over again, year after year after year, no new taxes. The other thing that we have to look at in the long run, and perhaps we should hope that the Supreme Court will require a reduction in the size of the prison system, is how to rethink the relative balance in investments in incarceration and education in the state. 30 years ago, the corrections budget was 2% of the state budget. It's now about, I think, 9%. Higher education used to be 9%. It's now 8%. We're kind of, the combination of education decisions, sentencing decisions, variety of decisions, many of you are more expert in this than I am, has led us to a place where we're making, investments in the prison system that are preventing us from educating people so that they will have jobs, pay taxes, and not be the recipients of everyone else's taxes. And we can't sustain that. So we have to have a long view as well as a short view over the next few years about how to get to a place where California has a sustainable future.
As a way, perhaps, to wrap this up, imagine, if you will, we're in a private room, and I'm Governor Brown. And so you're looking at me and you're saying, okay, I want you to go out and raise taxes. And I'm saying to you, I need to go out and sell this thing. I need to sell a tax, and therefore I need to ensure that the voters see that the money will be used efficiently and effectively. So Ted, and imagine David's in the room and Mike's in the room. So what is the ask that you would say to them? In order for me to go out and sell this, I need something so that voters would be persuaded it's wise.
Yep. So I think that when we were working on the commission, we did some polling. Children Now headed up some polling for us, and we discovered a number of really important things. That the citizens of California indeed are willing to raise more money to pay for schools, but they also want to be sure, as you said, that that money is being well spent. So they want to see the outcomes. I think it goes back to what I said at the outset, that we need to couple additional revenues with a different way of spending that money, both in terms of weighting it around student need and about flexibility for local decision making. And then we need a way for the public to gain transparent access to information about teacher effectiveness, administrator effectiveness, school effectiveness, student progress, higher education's effectiveness in preparing a pipeline of students. And that's the package that will be a selling proposition, Mr. Governor, sir.
Thank you. Take it under advisement. David, what are you willing to give?
There is absolutely no doubt, and we've been saying this all along, that the current system, the current funding mechanism for our schools is not working. We have Proposition 98, which is the minimum guaranteed funding of our public schools, the minimum. As opposed to how much we're paying to incarcerate and keep somebody in prison, we are minimum paying for our public schools, and it's very sad. And it's going to take, and you're right, Linda, an honest, sincere discussion on how do we make this happen in the future. And our governor-elect has got to have those discussions and seriously talk about it. How do you provide an ongoing stream of revenue into this state so that we can provide the best possible education for our students, provide the best possible teachers coming into the profession, programs in our higher ed? We have to have those discussions and not be afraid to talk about them. You're right. That commission did come out and say, we need to invest more in public schools because we're not investing as much as we should. Other states provide a lot more funding into our public school system. But I welcome the discussions that will be happening because I know that the governor-elect has asked CTA to be a part of those discussions, and we are very much looking forward to being a part of that and offering some suggestions on how we think this state ought to be headed, and not to be afraid to entertain the idea of possibly increasing taxes to do that.
Okay.
The one addition I would make to Ted's point would be we have to do a better job of, I think there's a give to get in that if there's an increased revenue, there's got to be an increased accountability. That it's the give to get has got to be there, and part of the increased accountability has to be a recasting and a refinement of accountability in terms of student learning, and it has to be a redefinition, not just rooted in proficiency. Right? So proficiency ends up being a conversation about whether a kid is college ready. And then we're stuck with a college ready conversation and then but what about everybody else? I've said for a while, and my superintendent colleagues just cringe when I say this, but if you wanted to move the conversation and shift it dramatically, I have no idea exactly how to pull it off, but I'm just on a panel. So if you wanted to shift the conversation around accountability to prepare kids for something beyond high school, you would insert into what is absolutely part of our conversation now all the time, into the calculation of the Academic Performance Index, some part of that API would be weighted toward 20% or something like that, some career-ready measure, right? So that our public would know I'm getting some bang in terms of a future tax-paying citizen for what I'm paying in taxes right now. Something that a kid would be able to do above and beyond their high school diploma in terms of contributing to society that may not necessarily be college right out of the gate. But I think we've got to get there instead of having a relatively small conversation around CTE and pathways. It's just too small. And we need to force ourselves into a bigger conversation about what career readiness means statewide.
It's been a fascinating and interesting discussion. I thank our panelists.
Thank you, John.